Good morning and welcome to another breakfast talk of the Brooklyn Waterfront Research Center. Today we are happy to have with us a few artists who have participated in an exhibit at Stand4 Gallery in Bay Ridge. The exhibit is called Bay Ridge Through an Ecological Lens. This is a series of artists in different medium in different places. And so with a whole host of programs attached to this exhibition, I encourage you to look at the website and to see some of these events. The BWRC always likes to feature artists and the ecology, especially some who are using the ecology in their artistic works. If you want to have questions, please use the Q&A at the bottom of your screen. We will be looking at those questions and answering them when the speakers are finished. You can also use the chat to introduce yourselves, to say hello, or one way or another to make a comment. And so now it is my pleasure to introduce Janine Bardo, who's the founder and artistic director of Stand4 Gallery and Community Arts Center. She's a Brooklyn-born artist, curator, and art educator. She received her BFA in illustration from the School of Visual Arts and completed both a master's in art education and a master's in fine arts at Brooklyn College. She's a multidisciplinary artist with a focus on humanities, connections to the natural world. She has over 10 years of experience as a curator in both public and private realm. She collaborated on a New York City public artwork titled Arc for the Arts that focused on climate change and resiliency in the community of Red Hook. Bardo is a co-founder of BioBat Art Space, and she curated the inaugural exhibition in January 2019. She's a lifelong resident of Bay Ridge, Brooklyn, and a believer in community and collaboration. And so it's my pleasure to introduce Janine Spardo.
Thank you, Richard. Hello, everybody. Good morning. I want to thank our host, Brooklyn Waterfront Research Center, for hosting this breakfast talk and bringing the artists and ideas of Stand4's current exhibition, Bay Ridge Through an Ecological Lens, to a larger audience. I am a big believer in community, collaboration, and the power of art to generate new ideas and bring about change. Stand4 was founded in 2017 with a mission to bring visual arts programming to the center of the community and to serve as a catalyst to create a socially and environmentally just and sustainable future, inclusive of community voices and inspired by local interests. Bay Ridge Through an Ecological Lens embodies this mission, and I am grateful for the brilliant curation of Jennifer McGregor, who designed an exhibition that is both conceptual and also accessible to the general public. The project set out to educate the community about the ecology that surrounds them, bring people together for a common cause, raise consciousness, and foster stewardship. The artists Jennifer included were chosen for their knowledge and skills in social practice and ecology. The artists presenting today, Christopher Lynn and Nikki Lint, will demonstrate a thoughtful and rigorous approach to creating work that is specific to the community of Bay Ridge, Brooklyn. This intelligent and sensitive approach is apparent in all of the works of the exhibition. As the front person for the gallery, I have been able to talk to visitors about the work and connect the artists to community members for collaborations. And I'm happy to say that people are very excited about experiencing fine art that is engaging and accessible. When I take people through the exhibition, they're excited to learn more about what is familiar to them. And then they are blown away when they see the familiar through a different lens. Like when they learn about the many layers of meaning that run through Christopher's work, or listen to the sounds of the water under their beloved pier. It adds to their own understanding of place. Bay Ridge Through an Ecological Lens is currently on view through June 17th, and our gallery hours are Saturdays from 12 to 3 and by appointment. And by appointment means that I will open up this and show you this work at any time, so just contact me. All right, so I'd like to introduce our first guest of honor is curator Jennifer McGregor. Curator and arts planner Jennifer McGregor collaborates with organizations to activate public spaces and create opportunities for artists to engage diverse audiences. Her place-based curating focuses on ecological, historical, and cultural concerns. In addition to Bay Ridge Through an Ecological Lens, she curated Shared Dialogue, Shared Space, a day of interactive projects in her neighborhood park with Korea Art Forum. She's working with Enfoco to make photography archives accessible online through the Nueva Luz Study Center. Previously, she created visual and performing arts programming addressing nature, culture, and site at Wave Hill in the Bronx. Perched above the Hudson River, overlooking the Palisades, the public garden offered a flexible platform to reflect on our interdependence with nature in an urban setting. So I'd like to introduce Jennifer McGregor.
Unmute. Thank you, Janine. It's really great to be here, and thank you, Richard, for inviting us. It's the more we can talk about this show, the more we can share it, the better. And it's actually been a dream come true for me to work on it with Janine and to be able to work in a new neighborhood. And we started out with this idea of making. I should share my screen so we can start looking at some things. There, we're seeing the screen, right? Let me just go back there. So I was, I have been to Bay Ridge a couple of times, but I really didn't know the neighborhood very well. And considering that ecology is everywhere, we really wanted to open up this possibility for artists to look more deeply into the different natural systems in Bay Ridge. And we also, as Janine said, wanted this to be a place where the community could come and, experience these different projects. So we did I do want to mention that one of our partners is Eco Art Space, and Eco Art Space is a platform for artists who work in the environmental and ecological space. And so Patricia Watts, the director, approached me and said, would I be interested in curating? And the minute I met Janine, I said, of course, this is perfect. It's so fun to be able to, like, as I said, work in a new neighborhood. We started talking to artists about a year ago. And I think one of the things that was really important for the success of this exhibition is we really had a nice long lead time to be able to give the artists a chance to think about what they might like to do. And so we have a really stellar group of artists that are accepted the challenge to be in the show. Here's a photograph of Stand4 with the wonderful flag that Ellen Coleman Izzo did with her Monday, what is it, the first Friday?
First Friday, yeah.
Yeah, First Friday printing print group, and people made these wonderful interpretations of trees that announced the exhibition at the gallery. So there's 4 projects outside the gallery. There's 13 projects inside the gallery. There are multiple programs, multiple partners. And what's really key to this are the offsite locations and the partnerships that Janine's been able to foster with these groups. Janine, do you want to just mention some of them?
Yeah, so having the year to plan for this, I was able to go deeper into the community that I know very well because I grew up here and I live here. But I learned a lot and met more people in the community, introduced the project. So the movie theater is going to be doing a screening. We have the Brooklyn Library was very excited to have an installation put in there by Kate Dodd. A lot of the parks were supportive in letting us do a few pieces on the pier at Owl's Head Park and the Narrows Botanical Garden. The Narrows Botanical Garden has a group of volunteer gardeners, and they were they connected with some of the artists and helped them set up, like Sergey's seed project and a poetry walk and tea ceremony as well with tea arts and culture. And again, the Fifth Avenue storefronts and the bid. So all of these places we've really gotten a much deeper relationship with these organizations in the community. And it's like, just now it's like I want to reach out and do more if I could, in the future.
Yeah, so this just gives you an idea of the wide range of people that have supported the project. And thanks to Janine and her colleague Elizabeth Pauley, they've been able to really, really generate a lot of interest. And that is it's so important when you're doing work in the community to really be able to bring a lot of people together. And so that's been really, really fabulous. This gives you a sense of where things are. I don't know if you can see my cursor, but here the Stand4 is sort of the hub in the middle, and the Fifth Avenue corridor has some projects. We mentioned the Alpine Cinema, the library, and then there's this group of projects down here at the pier. And both Peter Edlund and Rita Leduc have projects in various locations along Shore Road and in Owl's Head Park. So it gives you a sense of the breadth of the project.
And Nikki's is here on the pier as well.
Yeah, Nikki's is on the pier.
Mm-hmm.
So, and in the gallery.
And in the gallery, yes.
So we wanted to, so we'll just give you a little introduction to the space here. Janine's actually in the space, so you can see a little bit behind her. Nathan Kensinger has a wonderful video about the Gowanus Canal that's playing. There's 3 different videos that are in the show. And here's a sort of quick introduction to Christopher's work. And on the left is Benjamin Sweat, who had taken this photograph of the American elm back in 2010. And was wonderful. Most all the other projects in the show were made specifically for the show, but it was really great to be able to have a kind of iconic image that we could use to promote the show throughout. And then here's Nikki's work, along with Christopher's in the front space. And I wanted to just show the themes in terms of the ecology. There's a fair number of projects that relate to trees and also water. So we're having getting to hear from Nikki and Christopher today, but I just wanted to show you Chris Costin did a series of 3 works on paper that are, you can see on the left the original piece, and then it was printed and displayed in storefronts along Fifth Avenue. And so in this project, she's calling attention to the diamondback terrapin. And the text that she writes on the bottom of the piece just discusses the key role it plays in the ecosystem. And these are all, she's working with species that are in the area. And bluebud, or the Atlantic horseshoe crab, is the focus of this piece. And we also have one of our films in the film series is going to be about the horseshoe crab. So this is a way of making these species that are particularly in the water that people aren't really necessarily aware of, and bring that into the public space. Peter Edlins did a painting that shows what we're seeing here is a view of the shoreline from the 1890s. And you can see how different it is today, but he's showing us the native plants in blue and the introduced plants in brown. And it's in 3 locations that are in the parks. And then the center picture that we're seeing is in the Stand4 backyard area, which I bet you the Japanese knotweed is much taller now.
Yes, you can barely see the image now. It's about almost up to the top now.
Yeah, so he started with an interest in the Japanese knotweed, and that sort of led him to learning more about the other plants of the area. And then Rita Leduc also has a piece at the American Veterans Memorial Pier, and her field marks are a way of kind of looking. They're these wonderful mixed media pieces that are based on her perceptions of the space looking in both directions. And she's positioned these at different thresholds, different places that you might be moving from one place to the other in the neighborhood. And this one is at the pier. And we mentioned that we've had some programs that have happened already, but tomorrow we hope it won't be raining in the late afternoon, so we can do a walk, and Christopher will be participating in that. And we'll do another walk and talk on June 10th. And if we didn't have enough things going on, we also are doing another virtual talk with Nikki will be part of that, but also Kate Dodd, who did the amazing installation at the library that Janine mentioned. And finally, we have our film screening. So this was not part of our original idea when we started the show, but the Alpine Cinema was so wonderful to be able to let us have Aaron Assis do a mural that you can kind of see in the picture underneath the marquee, that they also welcomed us to be able to show this focus on Brooklyn through an ecological lens. So these are some of the films that we're showing, and we hope that you will consider coming and seeing them, because we were really excited to see how many really interesting films were. These are all very recent in the last few years, and just to see the way that people are discovering different issues throughout the borough. Although we do have one, the Hart Island, which is in the Bronx waterfront, waterfront area. So we will journey over there, but
They're all connected. The waters are all connected.
they're all connected to the water. All the projects are connected to the water, connected
Yeah.
to ecology. So,
Yeah.
so that's my introduction with Janine, and we're going to turn it over to, I'll stop sharing and turn it over to Christopher, but you're going to introduce him first, right?
Yes, and I'd love to introduce Christopher Lynn. Christopher Lynn is a Brooklyn-based artist and educator with a background in research science. Fueled by a lifelong obsession with fossils, his experimental installations, sculptures, and performances question the world we inhabit and envision the one we will leave behind. Often collaborating with non-human organisms or wider ecologies, his time-based works synthesize elements of environmental ecology with meditative practices to explore the interconnected nature of our material world. After receiving a BA from Yale University and an MFA from Hunter College, Lynn was awarded the C12 Emerging Artist Fellowship in 2016. He has shown work and performed recently at Recess Art, Flux Factory, Wave Hill, the United Nations, and the Queen's Museum. He was a 2020 Bronx Museum AIM Emerging Artist Fellow and a 2022 Wave Hill Winter Workspace Artist in Residence. He currently teaches at Hunter College and Parsons Fine Arts, and is co-director of the research-based artist collective Sprekiscan Institute. Christopher, you can fix that for me if I said it wrong.
Thank you, Janine, for that wonderful intro. And thank you, Jennifer, for including me in this incredible show, and Richard and the Brooklyn Waterfront Research Center for inviting me for this platform. I'm excited to share some of my work with you today. And you did a great job pronouncing it, Sprekiscan Institute. But let me hop into a quick screen share here. I'm going to be talking a little bit about my work at the show and some of the research that went behind it. Here's a quick sort of detailed view of one of the tanks that's inside of the sculpture, which is made up of a few different parts. As you heard from the intro, I have a background as a research scientist. So a lot of my work comes from a kind of experimental background where I get really interested in a material, a phenomenon, an ecology, and get a little bit deeper into how some of those materials interact with one another and try to employ them as the medium for the work. This is a work that has a kind of chemical process that's going on within it that's using harbor water that was taken from American Veterans Memorial Pier. We're going to return to this image to talk a little bit about it with more detail, but I wanted to set up a bit more of the background of this work. This is the work that I have at Stand4. It's a work titled Business as Usual that is happening on the sort of structure of a banker's desk. And I sort of took this architecture of the banker's desk as an opportunity to explore different facets of an idea. So collections of objects become a place for different ideas to take place and begin to bounce off of one another. But you can probably see from the right-hand side that there's a pretty vast materials list, and the materials list begins to reflect the narrative that I'm interested in. But within this aquarium is really where a lot of the research went into. And so you can kind of see that there's figurines inside of it. These are tchotchkes that I got from New York City sort of storefront that are brass figurines. There's a Statue of Liberty, a Freedom Tower, a Wall Street Bull, Chrysler Tower, and Empire State Building. And those are being used as the cathode and anode for a chemical reaction within harbor water. Around this object, there's also a bunch of other material displays that we'll get into a little bit later. But the bulk of my research that went into this work was really focused on the water and that surrounds New York City and our relationship with it. And I think one of the things that I became really interested in with New York Harbor and the city was a kind of process of our exchange with this water that feels very separate, but still surrounds us entirely. So one of the things that really drove my own research was this idea of combined sewer outflow. So all of this material that comes out of our city pours into the water and surrounds us in a really odd way. And I wanted to find a way to make that water that surrounds us but feels separate, since we're standing on the ground and the surface of the water, to feel like it's really, we're enveloped inside of it. And that really became one of the visual processes that I became interested in within the work. So submerging some of these icons of New York City within the chemistry of New York Bay water. So this one diagram, it comes from a research paper, really gives a sense of how this combined sewer outflow begins to create a chemical exchange within Brooklyn, New York City, and the many different industrial processes that are around the city as a whole. And so one of the things that governs combined sewer outflow are these outflow pipes. So some of you might have seen some of these pipes on the side of New York City. When it rains a lot, it begins to go down into these storm drains. But when too much water goes down to the storm drain, we also have sewage that begins to come over the dam and into the water itself. This begins to outflow a ton of really harmful substances into the water that surrounds us. And with the amount of water that gets collected in New York City and the amount of sewage, this actually becomes fairly common with low amounts of rain. So these are the outflow pipes. You'll see them on the edge of the city, and when it rains, you start to see a lot of this sewage water begin to flow directly into our bay waters. This map gives us a sense of all of the different sewage outflow pipes that surround New York City, with each of these little dots being the sewage outflow pipes around Manhattan. And with a zoomed out view, you really get a sense of how New York City, Brooklyn, Long Island all sort of flow into New York Harbor. We also have wastewater treatment plants that are sort of peppered around, equivalently around the bay, but we get a sense of exchange and a real interaction between humans and the water that surrounds us, even though we don't really get in the water that much ourselves. So another thing that I became really interested in is how to ameliorate these. So I've been doing work with the Billion Oyster Project over the past year and a half, and oysters become one of these real key resources as an ecological exchange within our water ecosystems, and become a natural way to filter out many of these toxins that are contained within the water. Within my own research of oysters, I noticed that really quickly, oysters can begin to filter out many of the toxins of the water. So on the left-hand side, you can kind of see how these oysters over a period of time begin to clean out the water through a filtration process by bringing this water into their bodies and into their gills, and taking out the toxins and actually feeding on many of the things that are contained within water that's not the most useful for life. So I've been doing a little bit of research also with Billion Oyster Project, running some of their oyster research centers that are all along the bay. I'm in charge of one on Valentino Pier, where we begin to track the growth, the population changes of oysters across many different parts of the harbor. Depending on the harbor chemistry, the temperatures, the different resources that are available, we have different changes of growth that happen in each of these oyster cages. Billion Oyster Project is located on Governor's Island. There are these wonderful oyster mounds where you see collected oyster shells that are in these areas to bake and to cure in the sun. And then they're introduced back into the harbor water as a seed site for oyster larvae. Another sort of thing of interest for me was how to begin to encourage oyster growth. And was really the presence of calcium carbonate, old shells. So oysters really like to form reefs, and their larvae like to connect onto old oyster shells. And so Billion Oyster Project does this with restaurant oysters and begins to gather them together. But with my conversations with many of the people at Billion Oyster Project, I became keyed into one process that is a little bit more on the cutting edge of how to really rehabilitate some of these sites of coral reefs and oyster reefs. So some of these, one process that's being used is called biorock, where a DC flow is being put into the water, which allows for calcium carbonate to begin to build up on the cathode or the negative lead of a power supply. So this is a really simple diagram that shows the sort of electrical field that's being used to create a system, and this encourages coral growth. It theoretically also encourages growth of calcium carbonate for oyster reefs as well. So by sending an electrical field into salt water with a free floating calcium carbonate, it begins to create these structures that grow and allow for rehabilitation of oyster reefs. So this is some of the research that began to knock in my head as I was putting together work for the show. Thinking about the complex chemistry of our harbor water, thinking about rehabilitation, thinking about biorock and electricity and electrical fields, and also spending a little bit of time out on American Veterans Memorial Pier and seeing some of the views that were right off of that site. And I think one thing that began to stand out, spending a little bit of time on the site, was constantly being in presence of the Statue of Liberty, hearing this water lapping, and being very aware that even though there's a separation between land and water, we are integrally connected to this, even though visually we may not feel that way. So this brings me to my work at Stand4, where we have a sample of harbor water from American Veterans Memorial Pier. I went over with some buckets, collected some water, and became really interested in that harbor chemistry, how to make visible some of the things that are happening within the water that are invisible to our eyes. So working with this biorock procedure, you can kind of see a little bit closer some of the collection of objects that are present on the table. There's a tank. You can already see some changes in this first image from the fairly clear image behind. There is also a collection of sand dollars, some extracts from the tank itself that are being turned into an ink. And that ink is also being used to create this ledger, so these tally marks. Down in the bottom corner, there's also a drawer where I wanted to sort of lush escape from the heaviness of this work. So kind of like what's being kept on the bottom drawer of a banker's desk, an escape for the viewer to enter into a kind of dreamy reality. There's also this brain coral that's sitting on the chair, which begins to also relate to a kind of absence of the body as well. So this work begins to play on aspects of calcification. So these the brain coral itself is a kind of calcified coral. And within this tank as well, this biorock procedure of electrical field running through the harbor water begins to calcify each of these figurines. So I want to talk a little bit about this process of electrolysis that's happening within this before I get into some of these objects on the table. So what occurs within this tank is a process of electrolysis to create this calcification. So a voltage source or a power supply sends an electrical field through the water, which is, since it's salty harbor water, has a ton of these free-floating ions of sodium and chloride. And when an electrical field is pushed through it, we begin to have the separation of hydrogen and oxygen. So water turns into different gases, and a ton of different precipitates begin to form around the base of the water. And we can kind of see this as the reaction occurs over the course of this exhibition. Bubbles begin to appear on the surface of each of these cathodes and anodes as the reaction is occurring. And this causes a kind of cloud-like structure to appear at the top of the tank. And as this exhibition continues, this cloud-like structure begins to rain down and create silt layers on the bottom of the water, a kind of visualization of what's happening in our waters as well. So I'm going to choose a couple videos where you can kind of see some of the movement that happens in the water. I kind of liken it to a snow globe. So as this reaction is happening, if you're looking a little bit closely, I'm not sure what the resolution of your screens are. You can kind of see a fine mist of gases that are rising, especially from this central Wall Street bull structure. And a ton of sediment begins to rain down from this top structure. Progressing a week in, you can see some changes in the color, some more silt being built up, and this process continuing to occur. You can also see that these figurines are also beginning to calcify, so a crystalline structure is appearing around the outside as well. So bubbles are referring to this gap that's separating between the hydrogen and the oxygen from the water, and tons of these different metal precipitates are breaking down from the figurines that are being used as the cathode, and a ton of these other precipitates in the water as well. As this exhibition continued, there's quite a bit of evolution that happened within the water, and I was really interested in how this could become a kind of visualization for a dystopia, one that reflected a little bit more of the direness of the situation of climate change and our interactions with our environment. So there is a kind of beauty to this work, and this sky begins to reflect something that feels a little bit more scorched as the colors begin to change in this top area. We also have these wonderful orange lights that begin to filter through. And as the exhibition continued, there was continued changes in the chemistry of this water. This is the last image that I took about earlier this week, where we have some of these bigger structures from the top cloud-like area beginning to fall and really bury many of these objects that surrounded it in the bottom. So that is sort of the process that's happening around it. But I was also interested in aspects of how this could relate to other projects that I have at hand. This work comes from a larger body of work called Future Fossils, which is really thinking about what legacy we're leaving behind after we all leave this planet. So as a way to inspect this, I was really interested in the interaction between ecology and economy. So using this banker's desk as a site for this work, I became interested in how this could also relate to aspects of counting, of numerical quantification. So on the left-hand side, there are these stacks of sand dollars, a symbol of one-to-one organism with a kind of counted measure, and an act of tallying. So as this process is occurring, there's also this implied process through this tableau of a person that's just counting in a rote mechanism. That is a little bit about this work. You can follow a little bit more about me and the work that I do at my website here, Christopher Lin Studio, as well as my Instagram at Christopher Lin. Yeah, so thank you so much for your time, and I hope you have a great day.
Thank you, Christopher. I have so many questions. I hope please write down your questions, because we will have a Q&A at the end. That was great. I have the piece behind me right now, so if you see the changes that took place. So let me introduce Nikki, our next artist. Nikki Lint is a New York City-based multidisciplinary artist who grew up in the Netherlands and the US. Lint works primarily in the mediums of painting, sound, and video on long-term projects. Her work focuses on environmental stewardship and people's relationship to natural areas, from the Arctic Circle to the forests of New York City. She often works with ecologists, social scientists, philosophers, and others. Lint has participated in residencies at field stations where she collaborates with various scholars associated with the field station. This collaborative process has deepened her knowledge base and the resulting work for her and her collaborators. The field stations include the Tulik Field Station, Alaska, where she is project leader in an ongoing project, Abisko Scientific Research Station in Sweden, the Swedish Polar Research Secretariat, where she is part of a 3-year study in a team of 3 artists and 3 scientists. Hubbard Brook Experimental Forest in New Hampshire, and the Urban Field Station in New York City, where her collaborations are ongoing. Her work has been internationally exhibited as public artworks, as well as in museums and galleries. Her work has been covered by media outlets, including Forbes, NPR's Here and Now, CBS Sunday Morning, New York Magazine, and numerous others. Lint has given many public talks about her work and has received the Pollock Krasner Grant, Brooklyn Arts Council Grant, Puffin Foundation Grant, the Dutch Artist Grant, and has been awarded the Environmental Cultural Award. Milieudienst, I don't know if I'll say that correctly either. Environmental Protection Agency, Amsterdam, Netherlands. So, Nikki, I give you the whatever. Go right ahead.
Okay. Thanks so much, Janine. Hi, good morning. It's great to be with you all here. Thank you so much to Jennifer for including me in the show. And thank you to Richard for inviting us. I'm excited to speak today about my contribution to Bay Ridge through an ecological lens. And I'm going to start with a short intro about the larger project, the Underground Sound Project, that my piece in the show is a part of. So 5 summers ago, I found myself in Alaska, driving on one of the most remote and rough roads in the country, the Dalton Highway. But before I delve into the story, I'm just going to take a moment to introduce myself. My name is Nikki Lint. I'm a visual and sound artist living in Brooklyn, and for the last 2 decades, my work has focused on environmental awareness and connection to place. So several years ago, I remember reading yet another science article on climate change, and this one was specifically about thawing permafrost. I read about collapsing houses and roads due to permafrost thaw, but wondered how this translated to the landscape as a whole. So I reached out to scientists at permafrost labs all over North America to see if I might be able to be in contact with them. Eventually, I did hear back from one, and scientists were kind enough to show me around so I could better read the landscape to understand what was going on underneath. Which brings me back to why I found myself in the distant forests and tundras of Alaska. In the coming days, I saw forests destabilized by thawing permafrost, as it thaws underground, it disturbs the stability of the ground. And because of this, trees in many Arctic forests are leaning and growing in all directions imaginable, even horizontally. I also encountered thermokarst slumps caused by thawing permafrost. While I was there, I spent a lot of time sketching, thinking, and writing to process what I was seeing. And while I was inside these gaping, tremendous holes and forests that seemed to be from another world, I was also taken by the sounds I heard. And when I came back later, I brought a recorder and started recording inside these thermokarsts. The persistent sound of thawing permafrost inside these deep holes in the Arctic landscape was really breathtaking and relentless. It just didn't stop. It made a deep impact on me, and I spent a lot of time recording it. When I got back to my studio in Brooklyn, I translated all the visual materials into large-scale pieces. While working on these paintings, in my mind, I kept coming back to the audio I had recorded underground. There's something about sound which just transports you to a place or feeling that has been a great tool for me to explore the unknown. I became just so captured by this unseen subsurface world that was shrouded in mystery. Later that summer, I explored the subsurface sounds of the soils, waters, and forests in New York State and also in a field station in New Hampshire. I spent those days deeply engaged, far in the depths of the forest, listening in. I discovered I could hear deep, dramatic sound in soils, sand, mud, stream beds, trees, plants, and in this world beneath our feet. Even a snowflake lands with a thud. The sounds are just so powerful, musical, patterned, and dramatic, like nothing I had heard before, and they're just everywhere beneath us. The following year, I was invited to continue this project as part of the year-long residency, the Urban Field Station Collaborative Arts Program in New York City. In this program, I had full access to over 10,000 acres of natural areas in New York City. And equally importantly, I got to collaborate with a group of amazing people, ecologists, social scientists, land managers, and many others. I recorded all over the parks of New York City, exploring inside its soils, trees, shorelines, streams, human impacts, and so much more. I found underground layers of sound to be interwoven like a tight tapestry, connecting these ecosystems and communities in surprising ways. I ultimately created a public artwork in Prospect Park called the Underground Sound Project. The project took the form of a 1-mile sound walk with 8 stops along a wooded trail where visitors could access these sounds via QR codes. Here you see the corresponding website page to one of the stops where visitors can experience the sounds. And I chose bodies of water in honor of our subject today. During the sound walk, you can experience natural subsurface sounds, but you can also hear the human impact. The first time I recorded in the East River near a ferry stop, I had to rip the headphones off my ears because the sound of the ferry is so loud underwater. And later, as I was listening, incredibly, I heard the sound of subway loud and clear right in the river. I had to wonder how the ecosystem was doing in the midst of the traffic jam of all of these sounds. Studies have shown that many fish and sea mammals communicate via sound, and we are drowning this sound out with our own. I hoped that by slowing down and listening to these sounds that few get to hear, visitors can feel more connected to the broader ecosystem, and through this, feel a deeper empathy to the natural world around them, which in turn can inspire stewardship. So, when Jennifer and Janine asked me if I wanted to be part of this exhibition, Exploring Bay Ridge through an ecological lens, I was extremely interested. So in this project, the first thing I did was spend time, a lot of time in the natural areas of Bay Ridge. I wanted to understand where the draw was for locals in terms of the natural areas. I knew I wanted to find a way to tie the community into my project. I personally felt drawn to the bay, and it seemed to be an important focal point for the community as well. I decided on just one spot for this project rather than multiple, and to do a very deep dive in this one spot. I observed the water, listened, and watched. Of course, I submerged my microphones in the bay. I couldn't wait to do that. And the sounds of the bay had their own voice, a mix of swirling, moving rocks, a water treatment plant, currents, and boats coming through. As I was on the pier, I also noticed the voices and gazes out at the water of the locals at the bay. As I watched all these people move through and have their own experience with the water, I realized that I wanted to collaborate with them to create the piece. I decided to interweave their voices right into my underwater recordings. I wanted to capture the different perspectives to highlight the immense capacity of the bay for sustaining its functions and life forms, but also the myriad of stories and connections people have in relation to these waters. Through Janine's help, I eventually found and chose, and they agreed to, 3 people that all had an intimate relationship with the bay. Here I'm pictured with a fisherman who I'm interviewing as in this photo. I also interviewed an ex-police lieutenant turned environmental activist. And the third was a cold water swimmer. It was interesting as each of the 3 had a completely different relationship to the bay. And by chance, the 3 participants forged connections to 3 different parts of the bay. The fisherman was very focused on the reflections of the water and his own thoughts. The swimmer on the waves and the physicality of the water, and the environmentalist was underwater in his mind, empathizing deeply with this world he couldn't see, but yet yearned to protect. I reflected these 3 connections in the painting I made to accompany the work, which you can see here. And in my mind, the waves were the underwater swimmer, the reflections, the fisherman, and then the action going on underneath was a reflection of the voice of the environmentalist. My intention is not to explain what I hear underwater or give direction on how to relate to the bay, but rather create a sense of wonder, openness, and awareness of the vastness of this bay, both ecologically, but also its vastness within the psyche of the community. Okay, and what I'm still going to do now, I'm going to reshare for a moment, and I'm going to share with you a piece of the sound.
And where they can come in, spawn, and then move back offshore. And they're offspring of it. And it's also where it's an interface where freshwater fishes have developed the ability to cross over the haline barrier, the salt barrier, and move out into the ocean. And some fish can move back and forth, across that barrier.
So if you have this big wave that slaps you, depends on how often the pattern is for a wave to occur. And it also depends on, say, which side you breathe. If you breathe to your right, you can't see the wave coming at you. I particularly like certain conditions when it gets more choppy because it's more interesting for me rather than swimming in a pool, or my preference to swim against the current. I just feel like I can feel it.
It's a spawning ground and a nursery for so many aquatic creatures. It's supportive of the birds and mammals, and it's all interconnected. But really what they're there for is it's a source of carbon production. And this creates the foundation of the food chains.
More than if I was swimming with the current. But I get choppy. You can feel the force of the water, and I feel like I can grab the water. If you have the tide with you and it's pushing you, it's an easier swim, and you don't necessarily feel like you're grabbing the water because you're going in the same direction.
I think you're looking to get lost more than anything else. Obviously, when the water's calm, it's blank, but when there's different times when you have storms coming in or surges, then it's a different environment. And I wouldn't say there's level anxiety, but the ocean has different moods as well. So for the most part, when I'm looking out, it's looking for peace and calmness rather than like, am I reflecting on anything? I really am not. But the calmness of the water, the light reflecting off of the different light that's bouncing off of the water, I think that's very calming. And that's more what I think, if you're out here fishing, I think a lot of fishermen will tell you, you're more lost in thought when you're fishing than anything else, or even when you're looking for water.
I always feel a melancholy sense of mournfulness, sadness, and because I imagine what it once was. I've always had this a sense of sadness. God, I used to say, this was the Garden of Eden. This was the northern zone of the southern species and the southern zone of the northern species, and they came here and they met at the Hudson River, and all these land masses were created by the Wisconsin Glacier, and these outer lands, and this archipelago of islands and sounds and rivers and fjords, and there's an interconnection of rivers, and there's an interface of.
Okay, sorry to stop it right there, but we're running out. I don't want to run low on time. So yeah, that's the end of my presentation. You can see the whole piece at the exhibit or at the pier. And thank you so much for watching mine and all the presentations.
Thank you, Nikki. I just want to note that the people that have seen Nikki's work, when they've experienced the work at the pier and then come to the gallery and experience the work, it's a very different take that they come, they were kind of amazed by how different it was, the experience was when they're looking at the water and listening, and then looking at your painting and listening. It's very different. So, and I agree, because I've done that, but I look at your painting and I see so many different things, and I look at the water and it becomes a very immersive experience. Yeah. So I'm going to ask, I just have a question for each one of you, and then we could open it up to the audience if they want to ask some questions. So I'll start with Jennifer, because I'm the artist in this show. I can't say enough about, and Christopher and Nikki are two perfect examples today when I'm listening to your project and how deep and and how intellectual but accessible and poetic, and the research that went into it, really beautiful, beautiful works. And so Jennifer, I just want to ask you, how did you find these artists? Like, how did you come together with all of these artists? They're all so different, but they all have similar qualities about social, engagement and research. Yeah, you mute.
First of all, Patricia sent me a list of all the Eco Art Space members who are in the tri-state area. So that was a place to start. And that was actually really fun because I got to know about new artists that I, didn't know about before. And so I always, that it's always nice when you are curating and you have this kind of, that was a nice prompt, right? To be able to sort of learn about new artists, because obviously there's lots of artists I've already worked with, but I just thought the scale of the gallery is friendly, right? And it has this sense of, it's in the residential neighborhood. It has this kind of sense of a certain type of scale. And so I was thinking about people that I felt could work on these two scales, like the small space, but then also the world at large, right? And so that was like one thing I was looking for. And then also I'm always looking to different approaches. And I think actually looking, Nikki and Christopher, your presentations show us the way, the artists working with ecology do a lot of research, but they do it in different ways, and the outcomes are really different. And so I'm interested in learning about how, why are they doing what they're doing and how are they doing it? And so those are things that were going through my mind in selecting the artists, and then the idea of coming up with different, people that were going to be looking at things in different ways. And I think it's so much more exciting than I expected. Just the way people, the way you each found these, taking your interests and applying them to this situation. And I think the results are really, really fascinating.
Yeah, I agree. I totally agree. And this is a small space, and it is but what do we have, 13 in this gallery space?
Yeah.
I think everybody has enough room, but then the show is so expansive, so it reaches out into all the different parts of the neighborhood too. So it does kind of grow,
It's almost like each piece is a door to something else, right?
Right, portal,
And
right,
so
yeah.
It's like a portal to something else. And so I don't know, we were talking about it when I was there one day, that it, visually there's lots of different things, but doesn't feel packed. But if you really spend time with each piece, it just opens up a new way of thinking. And then the same thing, walking around and seeing the pieces.
Yeah.
Also, I hope it helps people see the neighborhood in a new way. I mean, certainly the trees, all the pieces about trees, and people know the trees are a special part. The variety of street trees is really special to Bay Ridge, but it feels like this show is really putting a spotlight on that for people.
Yeah, the artist became personal with certain things, like the trees became a real, the community became, they all kind of adopted their own tree, when they did, and they were researching with Kate,
Right.
and then seeing the other research that the artists do, it really makes them kind of question like what's around them and look again and so that. But it's a beautiful show. It really is. I'm really, really happy with it. And everybody, and it's a very quiet show as well. So it's like you walk through the community, you come across these little jewels and, these, so it's not like in your face public artwork, but it's very quiet but people notice it and they're affected by it. They talk to the artist. They've been talking to the artist. It's much more personal. So it's been a great experience. Christopher, I have a question for you, is that in some of your past work, calcification is a really, like you've used this a few times, and I was like wondering like why this process is so important. Like you have teeth sometimes and shells and coral. Do you have any bone in any of the work? I didn't see any, but that is very it's a thread that goes through your work. So I'm interested in why that's an interest to you.
For sure. I think calcification is a really interesting process, and it becomes a metaphor within my work of time and distance and looking backwards. I think when we're thinking of a shell that's been calcified or a object that's been calcified, we're thinking about a process that relates to a period of time and a distance from that object, a distance from that life. And I think in particular with this project, it became something that was both something that related to the passing of life, but also the opportunity for amelioration, for regeneration as well through this aspect of biorock. So I was really interested in those two aspects, something that felt inert, that a little bit lifeless in a way. Life has passed and left each of these individual bodies of these sea urchins, but also through that process and through their dissipation into the water through calcium carbonate, it becomes another process for regeneration and regrowth. So that whole cycle became something that was really, really deeply interesting to me, that our water is suspended with so much calcium carbonate that we can crystallize it onto objects, and that can become a site for new growth. And all of that is possible due to the bodies of other organisms that have lived in the water. So in thinking about this world over many different timescales, I'm always really aware that we are just living on the remains of the past lives that have been existent, whether it's through fossil fuels, whether it's through the sand on our beaches, the calcium carbonate in our water. And so we are interconnected in that really beautiful way, even though we are separated by millennia, by centuries. And calcification becomes one way for organisms that existed way in the past to become present within our lives in different ways, in different strata.
Yeah, I know you do that. And I love when I explain this work to people and go over that kind of process and that rebirth. And they're always, it really, it's a very hopeful thing too, because it is like you have this extractive, you're talking about all the danger, all the things that happen with our pollution and everything, but then you offer that, and then you have that little drawer on the bottom that's so whimsical, and it draws people right into the work as well, so it's a very it gets a lot of attention, from people who and explaining it, they just love to listen to the story behind it as well. I also find it really interesting that, like, it's great because it's not far away from Nathan Kensinger's work. And that film is about the dredging of the Gowanus Canal and all of the metals and all of the pollution that are in there and at the bottom of that canal. And then you have this whole process behind us that's actually very similar to the 100 years of, industrial waste that's going into our waterways. So it's like kind of a really nice pairing, of the works. Nikki, I just have a question for you about the voices. And I know that this is the first time you've used voices in your sound pieces, right? First, I want to ask you what you learned from the people you were interviewing and how it changed. Is it changing the way that you move forward with the recordings?
Okay, that's a really good question. It's the first time that I've sort of finished a work with voices. I had been working on a project in the Swedish Arctic at a research station there, where I'm also doing interviews and doing some of the same elements. And that was part of my excitement with this project, was that I could really immerse myself in this and try this sort of newer method out that I was very interested in. And it fit so incredibly well into anyway, what I perceived as a very sort of community-based exhibition and project. And yeah, it's very eye-opening. It's sort of like, you know, it's when you first go into like a new space, or when I do and I perceive it, it's sort of like, well, of course everybody sees it this way. Of course everyone's looking out at the horizon and noticing there's a blue patch there and there's a green patch there. But, you know, I'm perceiving things through, you know, my experience, the work that I do. There's so many elements of what's creating my perception. And it was so incredibly interesting. These three very, very different people, to see how they were perceiving the Bay. And, you know, I tried during my interviewing, I tried to stay very neutral, but then there was maybe something that I thought, oh, I'm going to try to push this person a little bit that way, see if I can get, you know, maybe what they're thinking or imagining what it looks like under the water. And people stayed very much on those three planes that I described. Like, they didn't want to move away from those, which is, I thought, very, very interesting and really nice, because it's, you know, as a community, we are all these different perceptions. And when we come together, then there's actually this broader knowledge about a place that comes through these different voices. And, you know, what you're interested in is something that you then start to learn about. And I guess that's how we work together anyway as a society. And what you were saying a moment ago, us as artists create, like, you put the 14 of us together and you create this larger picture as well, because each of us go into it in such different ways. And that really came out to me really nicely in when I was interviewing and I would have loved to interview 50 more, because I think I would have heard 50 more completely different stories. And, you know, people really also started to open up very personally. And once they started to speak about their connections to place, I think people have very often a very intimate connection to places. You know, so I had to think a lot about each of the interviews was about an hour long, and the entire piece is 6 minutes long. And I give about 3 minutes of that to the voice of the water. So I didn't have much left. But there's so many different ways that I could have created this piece. It was hard to decide, because there were also a lot of personal stories, you know, of things that were going on in these three people's lives that were also connected to the place. So it's as this is it is the first piece that I've shown like this, it has sort of opened up this whole other realm for me, which is very interesting, about bringing people in, bringing their memories, bringing in the past, present, future, their relationship to that place, and how important it is to understand and appreciate all our different perspectives, that we can all see the same thing, but see something so different in it, and how important that also is for us as a community.
Yeah, it was also nice hearing their connection to the water, like, you know, their deep connection to the water and their experience with it. I know we have time for some questions from the audience, right, Richard?
Yes, and we have a question from Klaus Jacob to Christopher. Are you aware that calcification is Mother Nature's process to extract the greenhouse gas carbon dioxide from the atmosphere first by dissolving in the ocean, and then turn it into shells and skeletons, which then sinks eventually to the ocean floor to form limestone? But this process is slow and cannot keep up with the speed with which we introduce CO2 into the atmosphere. This process connects with your work. This process connects your work with climate change in a very subtle way, a theme perhaps further to explore. So to you, Christopher.
Oh, that's so great. I wasn't super aware of the carbon sequestering capacities of calcium carbonate, and also look a little bit more at that process of calcification. But I think the more I look into these chemical processes that sort of govern the world, the more I'm aware how interconnected everything is. One process is just a chain of other reactions that occurs throughout the many other different systems of the world. And so, as I mentioned before, calcification becomes one of those metaphors that can be drawn in so many different directions, whether it's thinking about past lives, thinking about it as a metaphor for also sort of solidifying or not changing or not moving, or benefiting or ameliorating our environment. So definitely an interesting connection that I'll have to look a little bit further into as well.
Does anyone else have? Okay, I have a question that any of you can take. Some of you are educators, have been educators, teachers, and this combination of research / science and art is at the core of your work. And I just actually saw an exhibit at Biobat recently. Janine, it's another project of Janine's where this idea of science and art comes through. And so my question is, are students, maybe, could be college students, but even younger, are students receptive to this? Have they worked on this? Is this something you've seen, explored in schools or in classes where students that try to see that there's a connection with things that they might be doing in their science classes that have artistic ramifications, or that in order to do their art, they might need to do some scientific research? And so that's a question for any of you to take.
I'll just start with the with when we were collaborating with the community, we did have the high school students work with Kate Dodd on the tree project, and they were excited about that, learned about their trees. So it was a good way for them to bring the art in. And I know that I had a 6th grade class come here to see the work. It was a big class, so it might be something that they would need more description up front. But I know that I think of it as a good lessons for the kids. But I also know that Nikki has in your underground sound project is all part of the public school lesson planning, right?
The New York City Environmental Protection created a learning module about the project and connecting it to all sorts of subjects. And all public schools have access to this learning module. And right now I'm working with New York STEM teachers, New York City and New York City Parks. They're expanding, they're creating another module and expanding the possibility for these lesson plans. And again, the idea is very, very much about collaboration between, like we invited in teachers and we asked all the STEM teachers in New York City is more sort of a collective of STEM teachers, but we asked them all to bring another teacher from another field, which has been really interesting. And I taught them how to build a very simple form of these microphones, which were then which are very easy for schools to make, which then they brought back to their schools. And now they're sort of collaborating and working on a way to blend these subjects. So I think that's a great question. And I think it's so important to bring these different ways of thinking together, bring together music and art and science and all these fields. And there was a lot of interest. I think I've taken more than 60 high school teachers through already, and it's still ongoing.
Okay, thank you. There's another question to you also, Nikki. What is the importance of drawing, painting to this work, especially for Nikki? why have you chosen to make that part of the process and presentation of these concepts?
Okay, so I come from a background of visual arts, and my sound work I just started working with it and discovered it actually for myself on the trip to the Arctic that I described in my presentation. And the Underground Sound Project did not include painting in it. It was because these were sounds that were very unfamiliar to me, and I couldn't really find much information about these kinds of sounds at all. I felt like I was collaborating with scientists on that project. I really wanted to give as scientific of a presentation as possible. I felt that if I started to bring too much of my own vision into it, that since I was introducing something that people didn't know that much about, I wanted to stay very, I filmed it with video exactly as it was, lined up the sound exactly when it happened within that video. So I wanted to bring it over in a very sort of documentary-like way. And what I'm starting to do now is work with other tools in my toolkit, one of which is painting. And it was very interesting. I was thinking about how do I bring this together? And this was a discovery that happened for me during this project. This exhibition has been actually quite important for my development as an artist, because I knew I wanted to bring the two together. And I thought, okay, I'm going to create a painting that works, with this sound. And I made a painting independently of the sound. And then I brought it together with the sound, and it didn't work at all. Like, it did not work. And so I was like, wow, what do I do? Like, how can I bring these two together? And then I started to listen to the sound while I painted, and this whole world just completely opened for me visually as I was interpreting the rhythms and the sort of the patterns of the sound. And suddenly it started to work. So it's sort of like this, I'm bringing different tools from my toolkit together and, pouring these two chemicals together in a tube and seeing what happens. And it's been really exciting, and it feels like the beginning of a new process for me.
I love the idea that an exhibition, getting ready for an exhibition, prompts you to go in a different direction and to expand your artistic work. That's really interesting and fascinating. And I'm sure Jennifer feels very good about that she's got that working. And I have another question for, I guess this is both Jennifer and Janine. What makes Bay Ridge special, in your opinion, as an ecological environment compared to other parts of Brooklyn, New York City, or even the country? So why Bay Ridge? Other than, I know, Janine, you love it, but that's important enough. But was there anything else specific?
Well, one of the reasons I do love it is because it has so many trees. It has the water, and it's, when you go to some other neighborhoods too, it's like we are rich in ecology here. We have street trees, and some places do not have that, which is a sin, which is like every neighborhood should have this ecology around them. They should have like rich ecology around them. So it's also, I see there's a lot of, there's development throughout the whole city, and there's a lot of pushing and pulling and, displacement. And I think of it as a way also to connect everybody. This is something that I think is important to everybody. And I think it's something that we can all learn more about, appreciate, and that was why the idea of the ecology was important.
Yeah. Jennifer, you're unmute.
To add to that, I would say we could do this exhibition in every neighborhood. Yeah. Ecology is everywhere. And, I worked at Wave Hill for 20 years, and ecology, it's like one of the more beautiful, spectacular places in New York. And we, our exhibition program was all about connecting people to nature, but there it's like you're just sort of overwhelmed by how amazing it is. And I think you can have a similar sort of feeling when you're on the pier or in the parks in Bay Ridge. It's just such a, it's a kind of phenomenal experience. But my workspace is here in the South Bronx. I'm looking at LaGuardia Airport out my window. This would be a great place for this exhibition, except for Janine isn't here to introduce us to all of the swimmer and the
I know swimmers who've been in that water.
School students who are going to come and see Christopher's project and so the ingredients of this exhibition of having somebody who's so visionary and eager to make this the Stand4 as the community space is really important. But in doing the exhibition, I'm thinking like this is a great model to do in many places.
And just I'll add that Bay Ridge, though, you've got the water, you've got parks with trees, you've got concrete neighborhoods and streets. And it's just, I'm sure that there are some people who live in Bay Ridge, they aren't even aware of all of the ecological surroundings of them and anything that can be done to just make them aware to walk a few blocks this way or a few blocks that way, and they will, a world will open up, a world can open up to them.
And I think that this idea also of the water, and Christopher, you talked about it with this idea of that we're encircled by water, and that is a very special part of Bay Ridge, is your sense of your connectivity to the water and the world beyond.
Speaking of that water, I have a question. Nikki, did the swimmer go from Bay Ridge to Staten Island? Is that that where she swims, the cold water swimmer?
I think Janine would know a lot more about this because Janine swims with her.
Oh.
Yeah, Phyllis is an amazing swimmer, really talented and very strong. And she has done the swim from Coney Island to Red Hook. So that swim she took under the Narrows through so I think she's done it more than once. And she's done some other spectacular swims too. I think she's done around Manhattan. But she's, so it's unusual to have somebody swimming through the Narrows. I actually spotted some of those swimmers once. It was very exciting. I'm like, I know you, because they're also so small in the water. So they're, creeping by, but it's not, they have to have a boat. They have to have support and stuff. So, but there are a lot of open water swimmers in Brighton Beach and Coney Island, Brighton Beach, especially, that also have their own experience with these waterways and can tell a lot of stories,
Okay. We have a colleague at City Tech, an architectural professor who is a swimmer, and he's done around Manhattan. I know that, but he grew up in the houses in Coney Island, and that's where he grew up, and so that's why he swims. Well, I really appreciated this, as I think has our audience. I thank you all for the time that you spent. I hope that everybody out there, including us, we get a chance to see this. By the way, okay, so it's just somebody saying a thank you. I thought there was one more question, but someone saying, I know, compliment you. All talks were so engaging and I learned so much from them. I love the science and the art. Thank you. And I think we are seeing more of that, and you are doing a yeoman's job in bringing that together. And so to all of you, thank you. To the audience who came and shared this with us, I thank you. This is our last Zoom meeting. I hope next academic year, BWRC will be having breakfast talks in person once again. Please continue to join us. And I want to, the support behind this is done by two project coordinators for us, Jasmine Blackburn and Jim Colombo. And Jasmine will be leaving us this semester. And it is always, we laugh and say that BWRC is a stepping stone to greater things. It's a part-time job that people can get while they're students, and we expose them to the water, and frequently they come with their knowledge already. And so we are sad to see them go, and we will be keeping in touch with them. So Jasmine and Jim, come on for a second so we could say thank you and goodbye. Okay, there's Jim and there's Jasmine. So thank you very much. Okay, and so everyone, thank you, and we will see you in the fall. Enjoy your summers and go
Thank you,
to see
everybody.
the exhibit.
I
Okay.
look forward to seeing you in person. Thank you.